Can I take Andrew Williams?
Thank you, Mr Chair. I take a call, part 2 of the Local Government Act Amendment Bill. Mr Chair, this afternoon in this Parliament we had the visit of the Prince of Belgium, the Crown Prince Philip of Belgium, visiting New Zealand. And it is ironic that on the same afternoon that His Royal Highness visits this Parliament, and where we have the names of Passchendaele and Messines and other great battles to fight for democracy and to fight for the right of people to live in freedom, and where the Prince of Belgium comes to this Parliament to reciprocate the great and lengthy relationship that New Zealand has with Western Europe to fight for democracy, it is most interesting that this government rams through the Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill on a slim 61 to 60 vote, hanging in the wings with the Honourable Peter Dunn, who, as we've heard before, double crosses the bridges when he comes to it, and in this case obviously has given his deputy and others around the country one message, but then doesn't turn up to this Parliament and gives his vote to the national government to allow this to go through 61 to 60. And it's most interesting, therefore, this country, which has always stood as a democracy, first country in the world to give women the vote, and to be a country that stood by democracy and to make sure that the democratic principles were upheld and that we stood for those, that this government would ram through a bill that basically kneecaps and reduces the democratic level of our second tier of government, our local government in New Zealand. And this is very much the case, that as a result of this bill, our second tier, we don't have, unlike many other countries, unlike Australia, which has several more tiers of government than we do, the United States and many other democracies have several more tiers than we do. We only have central government and local government, and what this central government is doing, this national central government doing, supported by the ACT Party and supported by United Future, is basically kneecapping and pulling the rug from underneath local government. And I think what's most disturbing here, Mr Chair, is that in part 2 here that we're discussing the transitional arrangements, that again it's been shown that this government had the arrogance to not properly consult with the likes of Local Government New Zealand, the body that represents the 78 councils in this country, the body that has as its president Mayor Lawrence Ewell, Mayor of Hastings, that has many mayors and chairs of regional councils around New Zealand sitting on its board, that has senior executives with extensive experience in local government, that is the mouthpiece on behalf of Local Government New Zealand. And yet throughout this Local Government Act 2002 Amendment Bill, they have shown a complete disregard, really, to sit down with the very body that represents that sector and say, is this right and is this workable and is this really going to work for local government in New Zealand? Now, can you imagine if this was a bill that was affecting federated farmers, if this was a bill affecting Business New Zealand, if this was a bill affecting Chambers of Commerce in New Zealand? They would be out there seeing their mates at Federated Farmers, Connor Roberts, the brother of Bill English, Connor English, the brother of Bill English. They'd be out seeing their mates, Phil, whatever his name is at Business New Zealand, Phil, what's his name, Phil O'Reilly. They'd be seeing Phil, they'd be seeing Connor, they'd be seeing all their mates, and they'd be sitting down and saying, how does it work for your sector? How does it work for your sector? And is this right for your sector? And is it going to have the right outcomes that we need to help your sector succeed and do better? But did this government do that? No, it did not. It did not sit down properly and consult with Local Government New Zealand. It did not sit down and properly consult with the many councils of New Zealand, with the many mayors and councillors, some of which have got 2, 3, 4 decades of experience in this field. They did not sit down and consult with them. Many of them are National Party mayors and regional chairs, and they don't even understand the fact that their own party members, their own mayors in some of these areas are saying to them, we are National Party mayors or councillors, And they were, Mr Chair.
Andrew Williams.
Mr. Chair, and we don't agree with our own government and our own party. Now, what does that say to you? What does it say to you about the arrogance of this government that they even ignore senior local government people who've had responsibility for the infrastructure of this country, the communities of this country, building up the communities of this country over many decades, that they will not even sit down and consult with them. And then when they went to the local government conference this year, Mr Chairman, back in July, all 78 councils passed a vote unanimously saying they did not support this bill. Now, I have never seen that ever in a situation like that, where 78 councils would unanimously vote that the government has got it wrong in this respect. Now, that is incredible. And the fact that probably the majority of those mayors were probably National Party mayors and councillors. Now, isn't that extraordinary that they cannot even support their National Party government on this? So it is very, very disappointing. And in terms of many of these transitions, and we saw the problems in the Auckland transition, and there were many, and they were huge. And this national government that rammed the Auckland Council through, rammed the amalgamation in Auckland through, and now, only now, a couple of years later, we are seeing the outcomes of that. And there's some big problems there. And there's some huge cost blowouts. And there's some massive costs in terms of the merging of the computer systems and the merging of the staff systems and all sorts of other systems. And what we were promised from this government, we were promised a reduction in rates in Auckland. We were promised more efficiency in Auckland. We were promised all sorts of things from this government. And remember, this was John Key's idea back in 2005-06, when he was a backbench MP sitting back up in the gods. As a backbench MP, he said, I want to form a super city in Auckland, and I'll get it. And he became Prime Minister and then handed it over to Rodney Hyde to do his dirty work for him. So people of New Zealand, just remember, it wasn't just Rodney Hyde, it was John Key, backbench MP, who had a private member's bill, but it never got picked from the ballot. Don't look at me like that, Nicky Wagner. John Key, look back in the records. John Key had a private member's bill to create a super city in Auckland. It never got picked from the ballot. So always remember, New Zealand, John Key created the super city in Auckland, but he got Rodney Hyde to do his dirty work. And now look at what we've got in Auckland. We have got a shambles there. We've got 75% of Auckland's business being controlled by council-controlled organisations, unelected people, people that nobody knows, all mates of the National Party, all handpicked by Rodney Hyde, all put on these boards, and they will not even provide the minutes of their meetings to the elected councillors of Auckland. They will not even provide the minutes of their meetings to the elected council of Auckland. It is shocking. That's what this national government has set up in this country. It's setting up for the rich, the well-to-dos, those who've got the influence, those who can basically get into the ears of John Key, Stephen Joyce, Bill English and the likes of them. And it's very poor. And now they've got the ear of Nick Smith, who's going to be the future, or he was the past local government minister. He'll be back in that seat by Christmas when Lockwood goes to Britain and when David Carter takes over the chair as Speaker. Nick Smith will be back in there, and you can bet you your bottom dollar that all these draconian things in this bill, they will come to haunt everyone in New Zealand, because the community of New Zealand will be absolutely devastated when they see the effects on their communities around New Zealand. Now, in closing, I will just say, everyone agrees efficiencies can be found, savings can be found, but this is not the way to find savings in New Zealand through our local government. This is not the way. The local government in New Zealand responded to the government's call to increase infrastructure in New Zealand. John Key in 2008, as the leader of the opposition, said we have a $60 billion shortfall in infrastructure in this country. $30 billion has got to come from local government, or this country will go backwards economically, and economic development is dependent on local government playing its part in this. They responded to the then leader of the opposition, John Key. They said we will step up to the mark. They have increased from $2 billion to $8 billion to provide that infrastructure, at the same time as the national government has taken its deficit from something like $16 billion to $55 billion and heading to $72 billion deficit. So don't, Dr. Nick Smith, lecture us on going from $2 to $8.8 billion in local government, when your government in 4 short years, has gone from $16 billion to $55 billion deficit, because local government responded to your leader, John Key, speeches to local government in New Zealand. I've got the speeches in my box here. The speeches are here. they responded to him. He said, we have infrastructure deficit in this country, and respond to it.
Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think nowhere is it more